Hello everyone and welcome to this video, which is in our Reengineering the Chess Classics series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler and we're taking a look at another game of the great Italian Grandmaster Sergio Mariotti. This was a game that caused quite a stir in Italy at the time. It was Mariotti drawing with black, with consummate ease, against the freshly minted world champion Anatoly Karpov at Milan in 1975. Some interesting points to it, so let's have a look at the game. So c4, knight f6, a few little transpositions, and we're heading for a King's Indian, it seems. But here Mariotti played the very unusual move c5. Slightly surprising in a way. I mean, you've got this great endgame player, Anatoly Karpov, against a very strong attacking player. And you're sort of wondering why Karpov didn't just play the move d takes c5 in this move order. After d takes c5, we just take and go e5. And I mean, without any engine help, just with my own assessment, I'd be saying that this is a very nice position for white. Very nice endgame. The king has been forced to move, so that's going to cause some inconvenience. And we get the pawns onto e5 and f4, which really restrict black, and we're just going to follow up by taking vast amounts of space. For example, this is Stockfish against Torch. Stockfish just grabbing space. Lots and lots of space, lining up h4, h5, h6, and completely squeeze black. Oh, that was very nice, actually. The next line was takes, and in we go. And in actual fact, in the engine games that I played, white scored 4 out of 4. Torch beat Stockfish twice, and Stockfish beat Torch twice. So, in general terms, this is probably objectively maybe even winning for white. And I mean, it's clear. In a human game, I think this would be very unpleasant for black to defend. Certainly I wouldn't have thought it was what Mariotti was looking for. The only other thing you might think about after d takes c5 is the move queen a5. Often common. You hit the pawn on c5 and you've got this knight takes e4 idea because of the pin on the knight on c3. But here, white's just got the very simple takes, knight e4, and then this move, queen d5, is an absolute killer. If queen takes d5, we go knight takes d5, threatening knight c7 check. Also d takes c7, pawn up already. It's just completely winning. So really very strange that Karpov didn't do that somehow. Karpov played the move knight f3, and, after obviously, Karpov had decided he wasn't going to take on c5 ever. We head up into a Maroczy Bind type structure. Maroczy Bind, what is that? Well, that's when pawns on e4 and c4 face a pawn on d6, and the white d pawn has been exchanged for a black c pawn. Lots of different variants of this structure. You can have it with the pawn on e6 and the black bishop on e7. You can have it with the bishop on g7 like here, and the pawn on e7. The nice thing about having the bishop on g7 like this is that the pawn on e7 supports the pawn on d6. So that pawn on d6 is restricted, of course, by the pawns on e4 and c4. But it doesn't really matter. It's not a target at all because the pawn's on e7 defending it. And of course the bishop is free to roam along the long diagonal. White's pretty solid, but there are, plenty of players as black who've kind of made a living out of playing this. And Sergei Tivyakov, the Russian-Dutch grandmaster, was one of those players. He started off by playing the Dragon proper and then moved on to the what they call the Accelerated Dragon, which leads to these Maroczy Bind structures. And I mean, you can really play these very well. The only thing that you can say is that they do tend to be a little bit drawish for black. It's hard to create a win out of this, but okay, you can't have everything. So knight c6 played, and now bishop e3. And this is actually one of the main lines of the Accelerated Dragon. And here a very interesting moment. And actually for this I dived back into a 2007 chess-based course by Sergej, which explained a lot about this line. I've never played it, and never really particularly wanted to play it, but it's just sometimes very interesting hearing what very strong grandmasters have to say about their favorite line, you know. And this was a very interesting moment because Mariotti played the move bishop d7, which has been played quite a lot in actual fact. I think this was something like 11,000 games or something, but Tivyakov considered this to be an inaccuracy, and actually the engines, the modern engines, do tend to agree. The idea is, what Tivyakov always said was that this knight on f6 is going to be misplaced. When white plays the move f2 to f3 to support e4, the knight is not strong on f6. It's attacking a pawn that's very well defended. The g4 square is covered by the pawn on f3. So what Tivyakov always said was that this knight should be heading round to c5. Okay, it still attacks the pawn on e4, which is well defended, but the f pawn is free to advance for counterplay, and the knight is taking away some squares and also attacking the queen side, maybe supporting some queen side counterplay. That's what you really want to do. So one of black's main ideas is to exchange off the knights and then transfer this bishop on c8 to c6 and allow the knight to move to d7. So bishop d7 just intends on the next move knight takes d4, followed by bishop c6 and knight d7. But here Tivyakov said, and the engines also very much advise this as well, that you should play the move knight c2 in this position. What's the point? You're avoiding the exchange of this knight on c6, so the bishop can't come there. If this knight wants to move to d7, the bishop's in the way now. So black will have to waste a tempo in order to move the knight round d7 to c5. Okay, it's not an absolute killer, but for the engines, it's the difference between about 0.5 and 0.8. So, you know, they think it's quite important somehow. The engines in the engine games, we were getting bishop e6, rook b1. Interesting move here. White's looking for b4 actually to stop the knight from coming to c5. Black's just got the time to do it. Obviously b4. There's bishop takes c3 here. Queen d2, knight c5, and then b4. This was a Stockfish pawn sacrifice, pretty common in these lines. And Stockfish thought that white had more than enough compensation. These games were ending in draws, so I mean the actual objective balance has not been disturbed. You know, white's better, but not winning. But this was how Stockfish was playing, and I think getting these sort of lines is a pretty good idea. You don't really miss the pawn, and obviously black's always got to be nervous about having weak dark squares around the king, and for humans that's obviously that's more difficult to handle than for computers. So I thought that was very, very interesting, and some aged wisdom there of 2007, that turns out to be, absolutely on the mark. So, Tivyakov was always taking on d4 first of all and playing bishop d7. It's very good on move orders, Tivyakov always in his lines. One interesting thing is that Stockfish also said that a6 was possible. It's one of those things where you sort of say, I'm not sure it's the most accurate, but it doesn't really matter that much. The basic idea is that you're not playing the bishop to d7. So if I play knight c2, I can still play knight d7 round to c5 without losing any time. That's pretty good. Are you going to play a6, b5? Maybe. In the end, Stockfish in this line played a5 later, so basically he just didn't really care. Well, you'll see the type of positions that you get, really. It's at some stage it's something where you say, well, one tempo extra, one tempo less in the Accelerated Dragon doesn't make that much difference. Bishop d7 was played anyway. Karpov played queen d2. and takes, bishop c6. I think I do have to say one thing about Karpov's play in this game. I had the feeling very much that he was a little bit sleepy, maybe. You know, he wasn't really trying to get all as much as possible from the opening somehow. I guess he was kind of thinking, well, you know, I'm white. I'm playing a player weaker than me. It's pretty much bound to turn out. And he was, I don't know, have the feeling playing just a little bit on automatic pilot. However, you do have to make one thing clear here, is that we're going to get, reach a position after move 18 that's, you know, pretty common position. But in 1975, it was pretty new. There are only 2 games that had reached that position before, and one of them was with another player to play somehow. So this type of structure, this type of setup was actually pretty new at the time. So it could well be that, that Karpov just underestimated it completely, sort of thought, well, yeah, this is just rubbish. In actual fact, we know nowadays that this is very, very solid and very difficult to break down. So, I mean, this was very much, a very interesting opening choice from Mariotti. So bishop c6 played, hitting the pawn on e4, f3, and now knight d7. The knight's coming round to c5. Now, you can do it in various move orders. I think Tivyakov was always playing a5 earlier before playing knight d7, but it generally tends to go to the same thing. The general thing is that you say if the bishops are exchanged in this type of position, then black should be doing pretty fine. The queen comes round b6 to c5, and then you start playing for queenside counterplay. And that was what Tivyakov said, and I mean this is definitely true. It's perfectly fine. So white should really try and keep the dark squared bishops on for now. I mean, at some stage later, you might, want to exchange them and then try and launch some kingside attack or something. That's possible. But just for now, there's doing it at this stage. Black's got plenty of time to get himself organized. There's no point to it. It's always one of those confusing things, that sometimes you say, no, you don't want to exchange off dark square bishops. And then later on you see a plan and you praise it and say, it's good to exchange off the dark square bishops because the king's position is weak, But it is all very context dependent. And sometimes actually, a plan that you didn't want to play before sometimes turns out to be, well, if I want to make any progress now, I'm just going to have to take the rough with the smooth, Also, those sort of things happen as well. So a5 played by Mariotti. Again, you can do it in all sorts of move orders. I think the engines were looking for knight c5 first, but it always ends up pretty much the same. b3, knight c5. And what are you doing with black? I mean, you're entrenching this knight on c5, pawn on a5, stopping b4. And on the one hand, you're restraining the queen side. On the other hand, you're maybe thinking about, I might play a4 and undermine as well. So, it's that this accelerated dragon type positions very much that mixture of holding back, but also with the possibility of advancing. And they're quite complicated for both sides to deal with. So with white, I was taught that white should play the rooks to b1 and c1, actually then c2, and just hold the queen side like that, and then play some consolidating moves, and then try and gradually move forward. That was that was pretty much the thing that I was taught with. Karpov does something quite interesting in actual fact. The basic problem is that you've got to watch out for black playing his queen b6 round to b4, which is quite annoying. Playing the hitting the knight on c3 and also a4 can be a problem. So putting the rooks on b1 and c2 was dealing with all that potential pressure. What Karpov does though is very interesting. I hadn't really thought about it before, but quite interesting. He just plays the knight to b5 just to stop the queen from moving to b4. And if a4, of course, then b4, and there's this pin. So black's kind of stopped like that. Black could sometimes consider taking on b5, but for now, not a good moment to do it, really. A little bit early. And, the bishop gets a square on c4, which could lead to some danger. So it might turn out to be an idea later, but not at the moment. So rook c8, rook d1, and queen d8. And the interesting thing is that, I gave the engines some starting positions, lots of different starting positions from the game. I gave them the engine assist with the position after 10 Queen D2. And this is exactly how a game between Torch and Stockfish went, that game starting from 10 Queen D2. So that's pretty interesting, really. I mean, I think it shows both, that Karpov played a pretty decent plan, but also that Mariotti, came up with a very decent way of organising his pieces. And as I said, considering that, in 1975, I've only got 3 examples in the database of this position before, that's pretty impressive. So what should white do? Actually, the problem is, with these positions for white is that it's not really very easy to know what you're supposed to do. I was always, this pawn on e4, f3, they're being restricted by the knight on c5, bishop c6, so it's hard to move forward. I mean, I was always quite keen in the end of transferring my bishop to c2. Always like this plan because it supports the pawn on b3 and also supports the pawn on e4. So at some stage, I'm going to try and get in f4 and start moving the king as well. And of course, in the modern era, you're thinking quite a bit about possibly also throwing in an h4, h5, because after all, we're missing a black knight defending on the king side there. But it's not at all easy to play, and reminds me very much, actually, this choice of Mariotti somehow, of 2 events, and one of them is the match between Kasparov and Kramnik, and Kramnik's choice of the Berlin against Kasparov, and that was a situation where you don't actually take on your opponent in actual strength, but you just give him a problem that's very difficult to solve because you're not actually, in a way, Kasparov wasn't really fighting Kramnik in this opening. He was fighting chess itself, and this problem turned out to be just too difficult to solve. And no wonder it's looking back at it now, it's no wonder that Kasparov wasn't able to solve it, because there is simply no solution. The Berlin is black's best opening for making a draw. So that was just an example of giving the opponent something, a problem that's too hard to solve, really. And I also had an experience like that not so long ago, 2016, 17, 18, something like that, in a tournament, a weekend tournament in Holland, in Haarlem, and it's annotated on my blog. I played at the most beautiful game I've ever played. I think with black I beat a 26-60, and so good it's hard to think where the opponent made a single mistake. Simply, it was just, my level was so amazing on that day. That was the morning. Then in the afternoon, I had white. I was half a point ahead of the rest of the field, and very surprised to see I was playing a 2100 player. So rather than the IM or GM I was expecting to face. So there we are. I played, and my opponent played a Benko gambit. And again, the weird thing there, the Benko gambit, very good for giving long-term counterplay. And in general terms, once black gets going, it's easier for black to play than for white. And I felt that I was spending masses of time calculating quite well, but I was getting tired, and I wasn't making any big advantage. And my opponent was, looking at his ease. And I ended up being worse. I mean, it was just really, and it was only when time got short and we headed into an endgame that I started, my opponent started getting tired and making mistakes, and eventually I won that game. But I was really thinking during the game, I mean, this is incredible, right? I mean, I'm playing well. I've just played one of the best games I've ever played, probably the game I've played the best in all my career. And somehow, I'm drawing as white, and I'm worse, against a 2100 player. So, but again, it's that thing of being set a problem that's too hard for you to solve. And I think that this is very much what Mariotti managed to do in this game, that this is very hard for white to break down this Maroczy structure if black plays it well. And Karpov just didn't really get a grip of it, didn't really find anything. And Mariotti ended up, actually, if anyone got an advantage, it was Mariotti in the end. So rook c2 was played by Karpov. So I think that Karpov's approach was very much about well, we'll fiddle around and then something will turn up in the end. Mariotti played b6, which is kind of interesting. I mean, the engines don't think that it's a bad move, but they do tend to say, well, until I'm forced to do it, I'll keep the option of returning later with queen b6 to b4, because when black plays the move b6, then this knight in principle is free to regroup. It doesn't need to be on b5 anymore to stop queen b6 to b4. So the engines tend to play a move like h5, for example. The very common idea, basically. Some quite sexy little ideas in it. As I said, if knight c3, we can go queen b6 back again, rook b1, queen b4, queen c1. Then white would have this structure that I was talking about, rook c2, rook b1. So the queen moves back, and then the queen moves back again. It's so this is what the engines were looking at there. But having that option open to irritate white with queen b6 to b4 is not at all bad. And there's another nice idea that I wanted to show you. Oh, it's in... I'm not quite sure. Maybe it was in an earlier variation. But black has the idea of playing king h7 and queen h8, Reti style, just putting some pressure along the long diagonal. So that's also quite interesting. Another idea actually is to play queen f8 and even bishop h6, for example, at times, just to exchange off the dark squared bishops there. So, I mean, black's got stuff to do, but problem is that white's very much entrenched as well. So if white decided not to do very much, it wouldn't be easy to break through. You'd really be relying on some random tactics somehow. But b6 was played by Mariotti, bishop f1. Yeah, I mean, the engines here are suggesting that black could think now about taking like this, playing rook ac7, then move the knight out of the way and just claim that this is pretty much equal, basically. Possible, but not too surprising. Mariotti played the move queen d7, and Karpov played the move knight c3. Actually, the engines recommend knight d4 in this position. Queen d7 is a bit of an unusual move. Not usual to put the knight on that square. So you could just play knight d4, hitting the knight. And if you're gonna, if the queen moves, you just take the bishop on c6 and claim you've got the two bishops. Yeah, not so bad. And if the bishop goes back to b7, well, it doesn't really want to be there. It's just looking at this e4 square. If the bishop wants to be anywhere, it wants to be on this diagonal, supporting a future advance of the queenside pawn. So that might have been a nice little thing. But I mean, it's knight c3 is still quite decent. And then the move queen b7 from Mariotti. This is, again, quite unusual. I mean, you don't really see this happening very much. But Mariotti's got a very unusual idea here. And I think it must have come as a total shock to Karpov. Really must have done. And it's actually a very nice idea indeed. So Karpov played the move queen f2. Here, just to put some pressure, thinking about playing slowly. And here Mariotti played the very interesting move knight a6. Not an engine suggestion, but only a very tiny decrease in the evaluation, about 0.03. So, not bad at all. You are leaving the pawn on b6 hanging. That is definitely true. But Mariotti's idea there is to play the move knight c5 back, takes. It's simply a pawn sacrifice for the dark squares, and this is very nice compensation. a4 is happening quickly, you can't stop it, and queen takes c5, of course we've got bishop takes c4, and even if you didn't have that, you'd still have plenty of compensation with the dark squares. I mean, all those pawns on light squares, and no dark square bishop to cover it. So it's a really, really nice idea, and the follow-up idea to it after knight a6 is that Karpov played the move rook c1, which was not a clever move. I think that probably the move rook b1 would have been the most sensible in this position. He played rook c1, then Mariotti just followed up with a4. So the idea of playing the knight to a6 is to stop b3 to b4, and now you're getting in this undermining move. Very, very interesting idea, I have to say. I mean, again, bishop b6, we're just going to take and go knight c5, takes. Got the dark squares, this pawn's weak as well. no worries at all for black here. I mean, white can do various stuff, but in principle, black's always going to be fine. Going to be too difficult, too much counterplay. All the engine games are ending as draws here. So, yeah, I mean, it's always a double-edged one, of course. When you advance the queenside pawn like that, you are weakening the white queenside, but you're also losing control a little bit of the b4 square. So, can white do anything about that? But actually, Mariotti's judged it beautifully, and the answer is no, you can't do very much at all. Because after knight d5, Mariotti took on d5. That's a good move. C takes d5, took on b3, and then played the interesting move b5 here. I was vaguely wondering about playing knight c5, with the idea of b4, knight a4. You do always have to watch out for these bishop b5 to c6 ideas. So what Mariotti does is play the move b5. And this is quite nice in actual fact, stopping first of all the bishop from coming to c4 or b5. But obviously it's not easy to hold a pawn on the light square like that. But what black's intending is just to put the pawn to b4, get this square on c3, and then you can either put a bishop on c3, block that c file and keep the a file for yourself, with the bishop covering the square on a1, or move the knight round c7 to b5 into c3. Very nice plan indeed, and well, the engines are considering that we're heading back somehow to pretty much equal position here. It's nothing very much at all for white, and in actual fact, if anyone's got the chances for being better, the engines are tending to think it's black. So Karpov played the move f4. I think Karpov still hadn't quite decided that he wasn't ambitious yet. So because in some ways you're thinking, well, you had a good solid structure, now you're weakening it. That unless you get an attack, it's not really very clear it's going to work. But I think he was kind of thinking about that still. But Mariotti just played it very well. Not absolutely optimal according to the engines. They're thinking of other plans but what Mariotti did was so sensible, you just can't complain about it. Just b4, very going to get that bishop on c3. So if white ever plays e5, eventually the bishop's already out there and causing problems. Rook c4 played by Karpov, and then Mariotti just played it very simply, takes and knight c7. Again, not the engine choice. But yeah, still 0.00. So it's maybe not 100% absolutely optimal, but it's just very, very good all the same. And the knight's still just coming round to b5, which is going to give white a little bit of a dilemma, really. So Karpov played the move queen e2 just to stop the knight coming to b5. Typical Karpov move, but Mariotti just played the move rook a5. It's quite a nice move in actual fact. I mean, it's threatening knight b5 into c3, and also if you play e5, which is not stupid for white, would probably have been the best move in actual fact according to the engines, then you can just play the move knight takes d5. What the engines wanted was to just give up a pawn, basically, just to open up the line of the bishops. This is quite a nice move, just opening things up. Queen d6, takes, bishop f2. And black's got an extra pawn, but you've got a beautiful bishop on c4, two bishops in general, black king a little bit weak, full compensation for the pawn there. Karpov played the move bishop f2 and now knight b5. And yeah, you have to decide really, are you going to take on b5 or are you going to do something else? Yeah, I can understand Karpov didn't want to take on b5. If he doesn't believe it's an advantage, that could only cause some problems for him because of the weak pawn on b3. So I think it was pretty much around this point that he started coming to terms with the idea that he was going to offer a draw and just try and tie off the game. So queen a8 and played the move g3. Maybe a slightly strange move as well. I just sort of feel that with the long diagonal, I'd rather put the king on h2, I think. But I guess he was worried that the f4 pawn might prove weak. But here Karpov offered a draw, and Mariotti accepted in this position. It's one of those positions actually where the engines originally are extremely keen on this position for black, and then gradually when you play out games you just see the evaluations sort of dropping without anything particular happening really. So I guess it's not that great. The one thing I would say is that obviously if Karpov was black in this position, I don't think you'd be having a very nice time. The key thing, the key way that the engines want to do it is to, for example, to play a move just like King G2, which feels a little bit scary. But the idea is that if Queen A7, trying to exploit that pin, then we go Rook C2 and force the exchange of rooks. And yeah, you know, with the exchange of rooks, that's definitely helping White there. White's then very, very solid. I mean, I'm 100% convinced that you're not going to lose that game somehow. But yeah, okay, you know, there are other lines as well that the engines consider equal. Rook A1, Rook E1, Queen A3, Queen E3, Queen B2, for example. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, this sort of thing is slightly scary as well somehow. You know, it's for the engines, it's just still just clear equality. Yeah, for me, I'm slightly worried and thinking of all these games in Blitz like this that I've messed up somehow. So yeah, you know, I think that it was probably quite a nice position to carry on somehow. But yeah, you can understand with black against the world champion. Probably playing an opening that Mariotti had not played very often before, then this felt like a pretty good result, and indeed it was. So there we are. I hope you enjoyed that. I think quite a lot of interesting information on the Maroczy Bind structure on this accelerated dragon, which I think is a very interesting structure to learn about. And yeah, another great Mariotti game. So got another one for you coming up soon, so do stay tuned for that. And thanks for watching, everyone, and hope to see you for the next videos. Thanks for watching.